G'day and welcome back. The very first personal development book I can ever remember reading is this little book here, Body Language. And so I'm very, very excited to have the author of that book in as a guest today. But before I introduce you to him, let me tell you a little bit about him. He has published 14 best-selling books, 8 of which are #1 bestsellers. And of those books, they've been translated into 50 languages, sold in over 140 countries, and to date, he's sold over 20 million copies. More recently, you might know him from the bestseller, which he co-authored with his wife Barbara, Why Men Don't Listen and Why Women Can't Read Maps. So who is this high achiever? He's none other than Mr. Body Language, Allan Pease. Welcome, Allan.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us today.
I'm certainly glad to be here and see you this morning, Matt. Yeah, you're looking very, very, very healthy.
Oh, perhaps I should have read this book again. Refreshed myself again beforehand. Now, I heard you speak recently, and one of the stories you told was about the fact that people with your symptoms and your level of prostate cancer, less than 2% actually survive to grow old. So what I'm interested in is that your level of success as well probably places you into the top 2% of people in society. And what I'd be fascinated to learn is some of those things that you've learned along your journey, from perhaps an interesting journey where you grew up in the Housing Commission in Melbourne to mega successful, selling over 20 million copies. What have you learned along that way, please?
Well, there's 3 lessons that I learned from my father when I was a kid, and these 3 lessons I applied to virtually everything I did in life, including saving my own life when I had cancer. When I was diagnosed with prostate cancer, and that was the second time for cancer for me. I had thyroid cancer the first time, going back into 1996, and luckily the second one wasn't a secondary, otherwise it might have killed me. But I had a very advanced prostate cancer, and the doctor said to me, he said, "You'll have to take our course of action, we'll give you 3 years to live." That was the maximum. They said, "You'll have 2 good years, and the last year you don't want to know about it." And I said, "Well, what are the statistics of a guy my age with my level of prostate cancer?" And he said, around 50% of guys will die in less than 3 years, and the other 50% will die after 3 years. I said, "Well, tell me about the other 50% who live longer." He said, "Well, about half of those will die in the next 2 to 3 years, we'd expect, and then another 10% will live a bit longer, a couple of years, and 2% will live to be in their 80s and get hit by a bus." And I said, "Well, I'll choose the 2%. How do I get in the 2%? And what I discovered with the doctors worldwide, none of them know how you get in the 2%. They all know what you have to do to qualify for the 98%. Now, if enough people tell you that 98% chance you're going to die, you will die. It's that simple. It's like the Aboriginals pointing the bone. If you believe you'll die, you'll die. I decided to go on the 2%. If you go on the 2%, you just look for the people who are in it. What did they do to survive? And that's what I've done. That's why I've lived so far 8 years.
And what did you learn from some of those people?
Well, the thing that stood out most was, without exception, that all of them made a decision that they were going to live. They had a clearly defined goal, which is the first lesson. Make a clearly defined goal about what you want, and that applies to everything in life. And they did that on their own life. They decided they were going to live. There's one woman I met who had 6-week life expectancy in the mid-20s. The doctor said, "You won't live, bone cancer through her whole body." She cancelled all medical action. She was a farmer's wife, very simple woman from the country. And she said, "I've got 3 kids, I'm just going to live." Now, she's now in her 60s. All she did, she had no medication, she just decided to live. And these stories are everywhere.
Wow, that is amazing.
Well, that motivated
extra
me.
40 years, absolutely motivate you. So once you've decided to live or decided to achieve a big audacious goal, what's your next step?
Well, the next thing you do is you have a written plan of action. It must be in writing. The difference we found between millionaires and billionaires is billionaires have a written plan of action that's clear. Millionaires know what they're going to do in their head, but it's not in writing, so they don't seem to go as far. So you write it down. You have it so where you can see what your plan of action is, with all the obstacles and deadlines. But the important thing is you must decide what you want first, not how you're going to get it. Like a lot of people say, "Well, I won't attempt to be a water skier because I don't know how to do that. I won't become a millionaire because I don't know what to do." Don't worry about how. Decide what. That's the first thing. Once you decide what, the hows will begin to appear. Suddenly you'll see how. It's one of these magical things of attraction. The third thing is you decide you'll follow through on your goal despite what others say, think or do. It doesn't matter what anybody says. "Oh, look, don't quit your job as a financial planner and go into television because, who knows, it's a bit unstable and maybe the company might be cancelled. We don't want you to leave the bank and go and work in a network marketing company because you might not get paid." And people who love you the most, those who are closest, try to stop you from realising your goal because they love you and they're scared you might fall on your face. But you decide that you'll follow it through despite what anybody does. Have a clear goal, set a plan of action and follow it through. And they're the 3 rules that I applied to in fact, I saved my own life with those 3 rules.
Fantastic. So with writing your own goals, is there any particular amount? So should maybe I limit it to 5 or maybe should I write 100 and just keep dreaming and dreaming and dreaming until I run out of ideas.
Anytime you see or think anything you think that might be good for me to do, I might like to do that. I might like to bungee jump. I might like to become a chief executive. I might like to be the Prime Minister. If you didn't have it in you to be the Prime Minister, you couldn't think of the goal. So if you could think of the goal, that means you have it within you. So therefore, whatever you think of, you write a list and have a continuing list at all times. So my list has been up to 30 or 40 things at a time. Because you've only got 2 or 3 goals, and most people might only have maybe 1 or 2. If you suddenly decide you don't like that goal so much as you're halfway through it, and you abandon it, then you've got no goals and you're floating around like a ship without a rudder. Yep. So by having a continual list, as you keep looking at that list all the time, some things will jump out saying, oh, yeah, I really do want to do that. Other things that might have looked important at the beginning don't look so important, and you can cross them off. But by having a continual list, you are continually motivated. And when obstacles jump in front of you, you get motivated by the list, not by the obstacle. If you don't have a list, you're motivated by the obstacle. If that obstacle is negative, you'll become depressed about it.
That is a really important point you've just cemented for me. So I shouldn't beat myself up for dropping something off the list and thinking I'm a failure.
That's right.
Because the list motivates.
A list of 10, 20, many as you like. And some of the things I had on my list include tap dancing, become a black belt. I had a list to play every musical instrument. I'm now 57 and I can play all instruments. I started piano at 45. I play lead guitar. I've just put together a rock and roll band. I learned to play the drums. This year I'm learning saxophone. Last year I learned harmonica. So now I can now play all musical instruments. I'm going to write and record all my own music this year and sell it to pop stars. I don't know how I'm going to do that. It doesn't matter. I decided, Matt, that's what I'm going to do. And since I've decided, I've had people volunteering, talk to this guy, go to that studio, here's how you do it. The answers are appearing.
Wow. So after you decide and writing music on your list, how quickly does the how manifest itself and come appear to you?
Immediately. It's a bit like, you know, when you bought a car. When you bought your car, as you drove around, you saw those cars everywhere. You'd never noticed them before, but suddenly everybody's got that car. That's because it's put in your mind as a goal. The car is your goal, and suddenly you see them all over the place. When you put a goal in your mind and you write it down with a deadline on it, and decide to follow it through despite what anybody says, when you start reading the newspaper, suddenly articles will jump out at you about that goal. You'll be standing at a party somewhere and somebody will mention something about your goal, and you never would have heard it before, but you'll hear them say that, and you'll turn and talk to them, and they'll give you information. I decided to speak at Russia at the Kremlin. Going back nearly 20 years ago, which was an impossible goal. But when it became open, that goal stayed on my list without a deadline because I didn't know when to do it. I was at a party and I heard a Russian accent behind me, which I wouldn't have normally heard. And I turned around and talked to this guy, and he was out looking for people who wanted to do business in Russia. The bottom line was, I spoke at the Kremlin to all politicians, including Vladimir Putin, who became a fan. And that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't written it down. I wouldn't have heard the accent to finish up speaking at the Kremlin.
Fantastic. So the key ingredients, and correct me if I forget them, is to just decide that you're going to do it and then write a list of as many goals, and if you can think of putting that goal on that list, you can actually achieve it. You have the power within you.
That's right.
And the law of attraction, I think you mentioned, was what will bring the how-to to you.
Exactly.
Is that the top 3?
Yeah, the top 3. The important thing is decide what. Don't decide how. Decide what. Don't even enter how am I going to do it. Just decide what you want to do. The hows will appear. People will start volunteering it, and law of attraction will bring it to you.
Fantastic. Well, that sounds like the key to success to getting you into the top 2% of the population and high achievers. So, Allan, thank you very much for your generosity of sharing those and joining us in the studio on your busy Perth schedule.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Allan.